Hello children, you are most welcome to this lesson. And before we start, we always have to remind ourselves about the issue of COVID-19 and the impact it has caused to us. We have to remind ourselves every time and again about how we can keep away from this deadly virus. We have to make sure that our hands avoid touching surfaces because this virus just sticks to the surfaces. It stays on different surfaces for a certain time, for a long time, plastics, wood, metal, so it sticks on every surface. We have to be sure that our hands are clean, and it can easily be transmitted by our hands from the surface to the eyes, to the mouth, and to the nose. So we need to keep our hands clean, especially by sanitizing. If you cannot access water, make sure you sanitize your hands as often as possible. And if you are going in places where there are many people, you can always put on your face shield. This one can protect you so much against the deadly virus. So today, we are going to look at growing crops. Growing crops. Crops are plants grown by man for consumption and for sale. Crops are plants grown by man for consumption or for sale. So, man grows different types of crops, and there are reasons as to why man grows crops. So, some of the reasons why man grows crops are to get food, because the food we eat, most of the food we eat comes from plants. So, man grows plants to get food. Secondly, man grows some types of crops, some examples of crops, to sell them and get money. There are some crops which are not eaten, but they are very important because they can be sold and man gets money. Another reason is that some crops are grown for cultural reasons, for cultural practices. Some cultures grow a certain type of crop, a certain type of plant, just because it's their culture. So they grow it, and even when they carry out cultural practices, those crops will be a must. Then, crops are also grown for raw materials. Raw materials, these are materials that are used in industries to produce other products. So some industries need raw materials, and these raw materials must be grown. So some crops are grown to provide raw materials to those industries. Now, we have different types of crops. But these types of crops are categorized into two groups. These crops are categorized into two groups. And the first group being annual or seasonal crops. Annual or seasonal crops. So, annual or seasonal crops are crops which take only one season to mature. They can grow and mature within one season. They are called annual crops. So the second group of crops is perennial crops. Perennial crops. And perennial crops are crops which take more than 1 year to grow and mature. In fact, they take more than 1 year to mature and get harvested. We have examples of these crops. Different crops are categorized either in annual or in perennial crops. We need to have some examples. So, in example 1, in group 1, examples of crops which are found in annual crops. Examples of annual crops. Examples of annual crops include beans, because beans mature within one season. We have cowpeas, we have tomatoes, we have soybeans, and many others. There are many others. There are many other crops which mature within one season. Then we need to also have examples of perennial crops. Examples of perennial crops. These include coffee, they include tea, they also include bananas, and most fruit crops like jackfruit plant, and many others. So, these are the two major groups of crops. But again, these crops are also subdivided into types. And these types depend upon the major characteristics of these crops. So the types of plants we have are types of crops grown include cereals, fruit crops, leguminous crops, root crops, vegetable crops, and spice crops. Those are the 5 major types of crops. So these crops, annual or perennial, are again grouped into those types. They are either cereals, vegetable crops, spice crops, root crops, or fruit crops. Now, these types, each type has different examples of crops. Each type of crop has different examples of crops that belong in that type. For example, if we talk about cereals, the first type, cereals. Examples of cereals will include examples of cereals. But before you give the examples of cereals, you need to know the characteristics of cereal crops. Now, cereal crops are crops that have one grain. They have one grain. They are a very big component of carbohydrate foods. They are a common source of carbohydrates, and they include maize, millet, sorghum, rice, wheat, and many others. Those are examples that belong to the cereal crops. Then when we talk about root crops, we have examples like sweet potatoes, we have cassava, and yams. Then when we talk about leguminous crops, these are crops which have root nodules on their roots. They have a common characteristic that they have taproot system. They have epigene type of germination. And these leguminous crops fix nitrogen in the soil because they have root nodules. They are very rich in proteins. And the examples include beans, cowpeas, soybeans, and groundnuts. Those four examples are the major examples of leguminous crops. Then when we talk about vegetable crops are a variety. There are very many vegetable crops. Some of them are green leafy vegetable crops. Others are root vegetable crops. Others, they are flower vegetable crops. But they are very many vegetable crops. And we know them. We use them in our homes. We can mention some of them. So like we have dodo, we have sukuma wiki, we have cabbages, we have nakati, we have uga, we have tomatoes. Tomatoes are also vegetable crops, and many others. Lastly, we have spice crops. Spice crops are crops that are grown to add flavor into our food. They add flavor into our food. So the spice crops include onions, garlic, turmeric, ginger, and the like, and many others. So those are basically the different types of crops that we grow. And for that matter, we are going to take note of what I've talked about. We are going to write some brief notes about what I've told you, what I've taught you about crops, about the different types of crops, and about the examples of each type of crops. So crops are plants grown by people for consumption or for sale. Then we need to write the reasons for growing crops. agricultural use. And lastly, some crops are grown to provide raw materials. Mention the two groups of crops. So the two groups of crops are annual crops. Annual are also called seasonal crops. And perennial crops. Annual and perennial crops. Then, what are annual or seasonal crops? Annual or seasonal crops are crops that grow, mature, they grow, mature, and get harvested. In one season. One season. That's why they are called seasonal crops. Give the examples of seasonal crops. Examples of seasonal crops include beans, groundnuts, cowpeas, sweet potatoes, soya beans, and many others. And many others. What are perennial crops? What are perennial crops? Perennial crops are crops that take more than 1 year to mature. Those are crops that take more than 1 year to mature. And we need to write the examples of perennial crops. So the examples of perennial crops include coffee, sugarcane, bananas, tea, and many others. So from the brief notes above, I want to give you a short activity for you to try out. Give 3 reasons why people grow crops. Number 2, what are annual crops? What are annual crops? Number 3, mention 2 examples of perennial crops. Mention 2 examples of perennial crops. Number 4, draw and name any 2 examples of crops. 2 examples of crops grown for food. Thank you very much. That is the end of our lesson. May God bless you. Remember to stay warm, stay safe, stay free from COVID-19. May God bless you.